Hockey Night in Canada, brought to you by...
This episode of A Conversation with John Conenna is sponsored by Generate. In today's digital age, staying ahead means harnessing the power of generative AI. Wondering how your small or medium-sized business can join this revolution? Look no further than Generate, your strategic partner for integrating cutting-edge generative AI solutions. We create personalized plans, adapting existing AI technologies to fit your specific business needs. Plus, our expert team provides essential training, empowering you to make the most of these innovative technologies. Interested in transforming your business with AI? Reach out to us at generateteam@gmail.com. That's generate, GENERAIT, team@gmail.com. And now, on with the episode.
Good evening and welcome to another edition of A Conversation with John Conenna. Tonight is hockey night. It's hockey night here, not in, of course, in Illinois, but a hockey night in Canada, wherever you want to watch this. This is a tremendous honor on tonight to have on Casey Kelly, the daughter of the one and only, and I'll pronounce his first name correctly, it's Leonard Patrick, but we know him as Red Kelly, and who donned that ice from 1947 to 1967, and just a tremendous athlete that we're going to go back and talk about a great book. And the other guest that's on my panel here tonight is, of course, the one and only great author, David Dupuis. David, of course, has written the book about the legendary goaltender Terry Sawchuk, The Trials and Tribulations of Mr. Sawchuk. Another great book called The Pierre Pilote, The Heart of My Team, the Chicago Blackhawks, which is fantastic. We had David on here a few times. Of course, he has the genre of the Seven Keys of Hildegard that eventually I'll have to have him back on here again. Yeah. But tonight, we talk about the legendary Red Kelly, which is a great book from Raxi Grigor and David. Welcome both of you tonight to this interview, which it gives me goosebumps, because when you're a kid growing up in Illinois and you see Red Kelly, I remember those leading years with Toronto, of course, when they defeated the Blackhawks, and then I remember him as a coach for the Los Angeles Kings and the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Toronto Maple Leafs. It brings me great pleasure. Casey, we will start with you. Good evening, welcome, and what can we say as a starter about Dad?
What I'd like to say is he was a wonderful father above everything. And the most important thing to him was family and team. And the team that he played for, whichever team it was at the time, was family to him. And his family values came out in the way he played hockey and the way he coached.
Wow.
And, he was a very spiritual, religious man. He never swore, never. And that's true. He really never did swear.
Wow.
So a very special person.
Thank you for bringing it up, because, nowadays I can't, of course, we can't speak for every athlete, but you hear so much scuttle and so much innuendo and rumor that it's a pleasure to hear something like that about, like a Red Kelly, a Gordie Howe, a Richard, when you hear those stories. David, again, I don't know where to not start complimenting you, because this is a fantastic book, The Red Kelly Story. How does it get started? How this came out in 2016, correct?
Yes, it did. Hi, John, again.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Yes. Actually, it started with the great Pierre Pilote, because we had done a book, Waxy and I, on Pierre Pilote. And then we were invited down to the Hockey Hall of Fame for a stamp unveiling of the 6 greatest defensemen of the original 6. Of course, Pierre represented the Hawks, and Red Kelly represented the Red Wings. And I had met Red before. I had gone down to Toronto and interviewed him for the Sawchuk book. And so met him again at the Hockey Hall of Fame, where the stamp ceremony was, and yeah, he remembered me. And then um, my cohort, Waxy Gregoire, got talking, I believe, with Casey, and talking about a book. Well, we thought about it, and yeah, not too sure. By this time, I mean, I think Red's 84, 85, 86. He's getting up there, wondering what he's waiting for. But they had thought about it, and then so I took it upon myself to. We talk about Red's Catholicism and his deep faith. I had called him and said, "What about doing a book?" And he said, "I'm not too sure." He's a pretty modest fellow, proud but modest. And I said, "Tell you what, I'll send you a Sawchuk book." So sent him a Sawchuk book. He read it. I gave him a couple months, called him, says, "Oh, that was really, really good. What do you think then, Red? What about a book?" "Well, I'm not too sure." "All right, I'll send you a Pierre Pilote book." So I sent him a Pierre Pilote book, gave him a couple months, called him. "Ah, that was really, really good. I really, really enjoyed that, but I'm not too sure." I said, "Oh, well, I knew he had a deep faith." So I said, "Tell you what, I've done a coffee table book on, there's a large church in our town. It's a shrine." And I said, "I'll send you a book of the shrine that I did." So I sent it to him, and within a week, he called me and said, "Let's do this book."
Wow.
Yeah.
And when does it start? Do you start to talk with the family, with Casey? When does it start? Like in
Around
2013?
2000, yeah, around there. Yep. Yeah.
13.
Yeah.
Case, what did you think of the idea when you heard about it that David and of course Waxy were approaching Dad in this to get this book going?
Well, I was very excited about it because, to be honest, he had been approached once before by an author who shall remain nameless, a very good author who interviewed my dad and then called us back a few days later and said, the publishers aren't interested because he wasn't a drug addict. He didn't have a drinking problem. He wasn't having numerous affairs. We don't think this book would sell. So, the author was upset because he wanted to do it, but he didn't see there was a story. And what was so, or his publishers didn't. And what was so exciting about David and Waxy was that they saw there was a story, and it was a story worth telling, and it was a good story, if
Oh,
I do say so. It's
Oh, great.
actually a very interesting story, and people who have read it have been very surprised at what a great book it is.
Oh my God. And again, we talk about an 8-time Stanley Cup champion, a Hall of Famer who was inducted in 1969. And of course, he is nominated for being one of the top 100 players in hockey. So when I hear this thing, how you start about the other author, uh, here I was looking at these notes and I'm like, God, we could go 2-3 hours here because on Red Kelly. I mean, just the whole Detroit in the 47 to 59, and then of course going to Toronto, changing the position from a defenseman to a
absolutely.
center. And a lot of people don't know he made the one and only Frank Mahavlich famous. So David, so when you got to get this going with Red and the family, how was it? Was he receptive to this?
Oh, well, Red is an awesome gentleman, and he took it very seriously. I mean, you have to remember when you agreed to do a book, um, it's an infringement on your privacy and your time, and but by gosh, he never hesitated. Got the questions together. We'd go down to see him at his place, and he was a fat and a great memory. A
And
memory, my goodness. He remembered stuff that I could not believe. And so therefore he was a great storyteller, and he had the stories, and and of course he had the credentials. I mean, he's, to me, the coach in New York had been asked, who would you like to have on your team, Rocket Richard or Gordie Howe?
yeah,
And he said, neither. I'll take Red Kelly. Because Red could play almost the whole game, a fantastic skater. And yeah,
He knew the game very well, offensively and defensively. Casey, um, did you have the opportunity, without speaking of ages, to watch Dad at some point in your life, or did you not see his playing career?
I did see him play. I was born in Detroit,
Okay.
just at the time when actually my dad had started playing for Toronto already, but in those days you stayed with your doctor. So my mom stayed in Detroit and my dad would sort of commute between games back to Detroit when he first was in Toronto. And we didn't stay there long. I think when I was 6 weeks old, my mom was able to get clearance from the doctor that everything was okay, and we moved to Toronto. So my memories of him playing are probably the last 3 years that he played,
Okay.
particularly the last year. I have clearer memories of when he was coaching, because then I was from about grade 2 and 3 onwards, right up to when I was in high school. So I remember more the coaching, to be honest. And
Right.
my siblings are all younger than I am. I'm the oldest of four, so I have probably clearer memories of the playing than they would at all. But I do remember some funny things. One of them being that my dad, he was such a clean player. He hardly ever was in the penalty box. And I can remember being very upset if I ever saw him in the penalty box, because to me, he'd done something very wrong if he, if he was in the penalty box, and that wasn't good. And it was almost embarrassing to me, because, how could dad be in the penalty box? One thing that you might be interested in knowing is that he was known by another name when he was in high school, Cornflakes Kelly.
Cornflakes, Kelly. Could you
Yes.
elaborate on the nickname?
Well, he was a boxing champion at
Oh,
St. Mike's. And they
okay.
would say, and in the left corner, representing St. Mike's, Cornflakes Kelly. And it was because he always ate cornflakes for breakfast. So
Yeah.
that was where the name came from. But he really could deliver quite a wallop if he needed to. And he did prove himself, I think, once or twice early in his career, and then he didn't have to do it anymore. He didn't like fighting. That's not to say that he wouldn't get angry, but he always would say to me, and he said this to my children when they were playing, and my brothers when they were playing, the best way to get even is not to do something that puts you in the penalty box and gets your team at a disadvantage. The best way to get even is to get out there and score.
Yes.
Don't be off the ice, be on the ice, and do everything you can for your team. And so even though he had the power and the capability, he really could have knocked people out, but he restrained himself and channeled that energy into the playing.
Incredible. Um,
four Lady Bings. I mean, four Lady Bings,
oh, like I
gentlemanly
said, yeah, we
player.
could go on and on here.
Yes.
David, question for you, because I loved how Casey opened this up about again saying that there wouldn't be this wouldn't be good. The other author saying that there wouldn't be enough here to make
Yeah.
this thing sell. How was he when we go back to the Detroit years? Because here he's in Detroit, of course, again, phenomenal 1950 teams in Detroit.
Oh yeah.
And then, of course, the situation that happened in 59, I guess he had told a columnist that, something why his numbers were down. I think he had played with a broken ankle
For 36 games.
for 36 games that a lot of people don't know. And this is when Adams went off on him a little bit in the press. And before you know it, does he talk? How does he talk about those Detroit years? Did you get what feeling did you get? Because this is kind of like the dual situation. Detroit and Toronto, he did well in both. I mean,
Yes.
team wise and individual wise. How was he about those Detroit years from 47 to 59?
He loved those Detroit years, and he was so good. I mean, coming right out of junior A hockey to make the team, to make the Red Wings was something that was almost unheard of. And
Sure.
he was a phenomenon from the get-go. And I mean, uh, you look at his 53-54 season in Detroit,
Oh,
he could win everything. He came in, he won everything he could as far as awards. and he came within a sliver of winning the Hart, which is most valuable player. And if there had been a Conn Smythe Trophy in the playoffs, he would have won that too because he had the most points of anybody in the
Sure.
playoffs.
Sure.
So, I mean, his Detroit years were phenomenal. And, uh, it took a while for his number to get retired. Gordie Howe always said that his number should have been first to be retired. But that's another story. When you talk about the great stories of the book, that is
That's
another story.
does Casey, to go back to you, did he, after, I'm jumping ahead and kind of going back, but in those years when you saw him as a coach or even just the family life at home, does he talk about the tenure in Detroit and the tenure in Toronto? Did he, still remember the good memories of all those cups, and were there different players? I mean, how was he at home if people wanted to talk hockey? Would he talk hockey from the past?
He would, and he became more talkative as he got older. I think that he realized that he only had so much time left to get these stories out, and he wanted to relay them. But I know people have said to me if he could choose which cup was the best. I know there have been different opinions on that, but he always said to me each cup was the best.
Wow.
As you won it, it was the best. And your whole goal for the season was to win that cup for your team. And losing wasn't good. You wanted to win. You wanted to be in that final series, and you wanted to win. I mean, that was the ultimate goal. And he said that there was nothing like playing hockey. When he was asked about his coaching years, did he enjoy coaching? He didn't hate coaching, but he loved playing. I mean, the playing was amazing because you're responsible for your own actions when you're playing. And when you're coaching, you're trying to get other people to take the correct actions. But as a player, he would say there's just nothing like playing the game of hockey, and there's nothing like winning the Stanley Cup.
Right.
So, and I did happen to take out of the safe deposit box some of his rings.
Oh, wow. Please. Oh, my God.
So this is the ring. This is very interesting. This is the Detroit one, which has all
What
the
year
cups
is that, Casey?
Well, they didn't have rings back in the day. So this came when the Illiches were in charge. One day the doorbell rang, and I'll turn it around so you can see.
Beautiful.
One day the doorbell rang, and my dad went to the door, and there was a FedEx delivery guy, and he had this big box. And it said it was from Detroit. And he thought, what is this? And he opened the big box, and inside was a little box. And then when you opened up the little box, there was this ring inside. And on the inside of it, it says family. So exactly what my father, really believed in was family. This was such an exciting thing. He had no idea it was coming. They decided that it wasn't right, the Illich family, that it wasn't right that the players hadn't been given rings. And so anyone that had not received a ring in the prior years that was still alive received one of these rings. Wow. And it has on one side all the cups that they all won, all the teams, and then on the other side, the teams specific to the player, and then inside family. That was wonderful. There was a point at which they bought their own rings because they felt that they should have a ring. And I think I have that somewhere. No, I might not have it here. I might not have taken that one out. Okay. I have some of the Toronto ones.
Oh, wow. Yes. That was the
before.
style of the 1960 rings.
Yes.
Yes.
And then this is the Hall of Fame ring.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Some of the other rings were already passed on to my brothers.
Okay.
So they have them because there actually were 4 rings for Toronto. Initially, they would take back the ring and they would just put more jewels on it. So yes. Originally there was 1 ring for the 4 cups, but then they did a special ceremony and they issued a ring for each cup. So if you already had 1 and there were, in my dad's case, they gave him 3 more so that he had 4 rings for each of the cups in Toronto.
And Casey, I kind of want to tell our audience, and she's wearing the number 4 that he wore, of course, in Toronto and in Detroit. And both numbers were retired by the Wings and by the Leafs.
Yes.
David, I have to ask you, because the book is written so, well, again, as always, by you and Waxy. But I have to ask you, it's the word here tonight. Casey brings it up. It's gentleman. He's a gentleman. This is not a book about trash, cutting down someone, doing this, doing that. It's about family, team camaraderie. How was he? Was he ever like, well, David, I don't want that question to be asked, or David, here's how I want you to write. How was he when in this preparation?
He was well, he was always a gentleman, but he was very proud of his accomplishments. He was humble, but he didn't hesitate to talk about what he and his teammates had accomplished. And we talk about gentlemen. Uh, Red was the first one to have a fight in an All-Star game.
Okay, I didn't know that
Yeah.
one that time.
Yeah. So so it's funny how these little things that happen. But he was such an amazing player. Like for Detroit, he would almost play 50 minutes a game because he was in such good shape. Picking tobacco in the summertime, he would go to camp for a rest when camp started. So he had no problem. Such a great skater that he could play 50 minutes a game on the power play, killing penalties, regular shift when they needed a goal. I mean, and as you know, he was really the first real rushing defenseman.
Yes.
Before Pierre, before Bobby Orr, Red Kelly moved that puck.
Yeah, actually, yeah, Kelly and Harvey, I feel, were the ones that really started. But yeah, Red had that way. He had a beautiful way of skating. Again, yes,
Oh,
yes,
powerful, very
powerful.
powerful.
Yeah,
Oh yeah.
yes, all the time. Casey, in like you brought up those rings and the Stanley Cups and everything. Was he the type, if you knew of course, you saw him in the later years, was he the type to, okay, we're down 2-1 to the Montreal Canadiens right now in 67. How was he? Was he one to bring the game home to mom, or was he one to just, he left it at the rink? How was he?
He did internalize a lot of things. He took the games very seriously, and even the preparation for the games. I remember always our meals, even in the coaching years, every Wednesday and Saturday in Toronto, we had the same meal. He had these rituals that he followed, and we always had steak,
Okay.
baked potato, canned peas. We had a fruit salad to start with. And dessert was always vanilla ice cream with frozen strawberries. We had that game twice a week, all hockey season, whether he was playing or whether he was coaching. And he would always, after that, go and have a rest. He would lie down, and he wouldn't always sleep, but he would focus on the game
Wow.
at head. And he would be thinking about the plays that the team could make, the plays that the other team might be making. He really would concentrate on that. And when he would come home, he would, you could see if he was upset about something, but he didn't really express that with us. He came home and he was dad. It was all family. And he felt strongly about that. And it was wonderful.
Yeah, what a thing, and here, I'm always thinking how the athlete must bring, he must bring the game home to him when something bad has happened or something as good has happened. David, I got to ask you, and Casey will elaborate on this also. What I found interesting about him was not only the hockey in Detroit and the hockey in Toronto, but to have during this career, a political career with the parliament. I was just like, wow, listen, your dad is a very intelligent man. To me. So David, does he elaborate on that a lot?
Well, yeah, to think that he was a member of parliament for for 2 sessions, and the Prime Minister, Lester Pearson, had asked him, wanted him to run. Keith Davey got involved in going to a couple of Liberal meetings, which was his downfall. And I've always said it was amazing that in 2 years, Red won 2 Stanley Cups, 2 elections, and he and Andra had 2 babies. You top that.
Yeah, right. A lot going on in Mr. Kelly's life, right?
And
right.
he was up in Canada. We got a new flag around 1965, and he was very involved in that. And he was very proud of that flag and being part of the debate. And his time in Parliament was short, but he never ever missed a game, and he only missed a few practices.
Also, he never missed a vote either.
Right, right.
And the amazing thing was, he said the games in Montreal were always a problem. And so the Speaker of the House, House of Commons, when it finished up, I believe it was a Wednesday or Thursday, where they played in Montreal, would always be a problem. So as soon as the session ended at 4 or 4:35, the Speaker's car would whisk them to the airport, catch a plane, get to Montreal. He said, I never made it for warm up, but I was always there at the puck drop.
Wow, incredible. This is great. Casey, does he talk about his years in government? How was that for mom and the family at home? I mean,
It was very tough because my mom had, by the end of it, three young children. I can remember spending the summer in Ottawa in a little apartment, and we all got chicken pox.
oh geez.
and no air conditioning. That wasn't fun.
Yeah.
But we did not see much of him in that period. And in fact, it was at the end of that time when there was one day he was coming home and the taxi was bringing him to the house, and I was outside on the lawn, and there was a reporter there waiting to talk to him. And I looked up, and my dad got out of the car, and instead of saying, "Oh, look, it's Daddy," I said, "Look, here comes Red Kelly." Well, my dad heard that, and he said, I haven't been here enough. That's not a good thing. And so he made the decision. That was part of the decision making, that he wouldn't continue. He wanted to help Mr. Pearson. He always called him Mr. Pearson.
Mr. Pearson.
He really respected him, and they were a minority government the first time. And he wanted to get in there and help, and they became a majority government, and he felt that he had done what he needed to do. And the other interesting thing is, David didn't mention who his opponent was for the second election. You want to go ahead, David?
Go ahead.
David, go ahead.
You're on a roll.
Alan Eagleson.
Oh, jeez.
That's who he ran against.
Yeah.
And Alan really thought he had that in the bag. And
Yeah.
he did not.
He thought he had a lot of things in the bag, as we all know. Yeah.
He did have a lot of things in the bag.
In the
That was
bag,
the problem.
Yeah. He's come up a lot, of course, in a wrong way, and that was tragic, of course, what he did to so many NHL players. But
Absolutely.
And you know that I worked for my dad in the business world after he left hockey for 17 years. And I used to type his letters and things. And I remember anytime the alumni got any kind of an increase in the little tiny little pension they were getting at the time,
right.
my dad would have me write a letter to Mr. Eagleson thanking him for getting that increase. Like, my dad was a gentleman. He would always thank, for anything that happened, and he felt that was the proper thing to do. And I can remember typing those letters.
Jeez. And here, again, that word gentleman, not a bad bone in his body, where, someone else would have had a tirade, of course. I have to go back to something that with David, and then I'm going to ask Casey if he talked about this. So it's 1959, how I opened this up tonight, his last year in Detroit. And of course, this story comes out, or his numbers were down. He had the broken ankle and everything. And of course, Jack Adams, this crazy now man who thinks he's moving all the jigsaw puzzles and doing it because he had so many problems with other players like Ted Lindsay, Glenn Hall. When this union came in, he thinks now he could just move people around the way he wants to. And he now is infuriated with Dad after telling a reporter, might have been my ankle, and he says, I'm going to trade you to, you're getting traded to the New York Rangers. I still have a clip of it from a thing called, it's a Hockey Legends video, and where Red says to him, I'll think about it.
Yes.
But never goes to New York. David, did he elaborate on that?
Oh, he was very animated talking about that period of time. And he was not one to swear but and get mad, but I'll tell you, he if he could have, he would have had a few words for Mr. Adams.
Yes.
But that whole, you talk about things not interesting in a book. There's not a story there. Oh my goodness, just a trade from getting to Toronto. Traded to New York, he refuses. And then, Punch Imlach and King Clancy in Toronto think, I think, we'll have to give him a call and see what's going on. And they they work out a deal to have Red come to Toronto for a chat. And Red comes in, and he's got a bit of a disguise on. He's got a hat, because it was big news that he refused to go to New York. The media was a little different back then, but it was pretty big news. And comes in a bit of a not a wig, but he's got a hat on and he's got a scarf tight. And he meets up with King Clancy, who picks him up. They go to meet Punch Imlach, and they go out to a restaurant. And after they've been chatting, they walk in. Who are there but the Canadians? They're coming in for that game the next night. And Rocket Richard looks up and says, "Hey, Rouge, Red. Hey, Red."
Red, it was.
And the amazing thing was, Richard knew right away what's going on here. Like, what, all of a sudden Red's in Toronto, and with Punch Imlach, but he never said anything. And anyway, they left there. They made the deal, and then the next night he suited up for Toronto. And Punch Imlach had said, if we're going to beat Montreal, we have to stop Jean Beliveau. And the only person I know who can skate and outskate Jean Beliveau was Red Kelly.
Yes, the neutralizer. Yes,
absolutely. Yeah.
Casey, is that still talked about in his later years, even after coaching or sitting down by the fire? Right? Does it still talk about how he, Detroit, what happened in Detroit? Did it come up once in a while? But now it probably came up as a maybe as a humorous to him, because it was Toronto, a scout in Toronto, and correct me if I'm wrong, when he first came into hockey, that said, this man won't last 20 games. And then, of course, has a wonderful career in Detroit. And now Toronto is begging for Red Kelly. Does he talk about that?
Oh, he did, because growing up, his dream was to play for Toronto. I mean, Toronto was who he cheered for, but Toronto didn't want him. They didn't think he was a good enough skater. And when Detroit reached out and said, we'll give this kid a chance, and as David had mentioned, right out of high school.
Sure.
And then that became his family. Detroit became his family, and he was dedicated to them. And he was very, very hurt over this whole thing that happened with Detroit. Very hurt. And his reason for not going to New York was because he felt the whole thing had been done unfairly. Sure. And he actually announced his retirement and started to go to work with a company. I mean, he really was serious about it. And Clarence Campbell called him up and said, you better go. You've been traded. You have to go. And my dad said, no, I'm not going. And he said to him, you're going to be blackballed. I'll make sure you're blackballed. And he said,
oh my God,
it doesn't matter, because I'm retiring.
Right.
That's it. I'm not going to be there. So I'm sorry that that's the way it is, but that's the way it is. So it didn't last long before
One
he
game,
did
I think.
hear. Sorry, go ahead, David.
Well, I was going to say it lasted like 1 day or 2 days, and he was already in Toronto being talked to.
Wow.
Yes, and he got a real charge out of being in the restaurant and being spotted by the Montreal players, and the fact that they respected him enough to not say anything.
Right.
They didn't come out and say to the press, "Oh, guess what?" In
Sure.
today's day and age, it might have been different with the social media and everything, but they respected him enough to not do that. And my dad really did respect all the other players too. That was
Sure.
the thing. And I think the difference in hockey today and hockey in the past is that there's so many teams now and so many players that it's not as much a game of skill in the strategy sense as it used to be, because they would play each other so often that they would get to know all of their different patterns, and they had to really try every time to outsmart them with new strategies, and they were able to do that. It was very skillful in that regard.
Sure.
Now the teams don't meet each other as frequently because there are so many teams.
Right.
And
Exactly.
I think that that has created a different style of play as well, because they just don't see each other that often.
Right. I remember we would go to Toronto 6 times to Chicago Blackhawks, and then they would come here 6 times, and and they were back-to-back games. One night they were in Chicago, they were in Garden, or the Olympia, Detroit. Yeah, that was the Penguins and then the Leafs. I found Dad, and this is why I really love this interview. I found Dad, and David, tell me I'm wrong, and Casey, I found Dad to be a fiery coach.
Oh, he's very competitive, and no matter what he did, even if he was going into business, he was competitive, and he did not like to lose, and he was a fiery coach, and he could get his Irish up. Got up. Oh yeah.
Yeah. I said to myself, Casey, before I let you speak, I said to myself, wow, I probably in his early years in Detroit, he must have been a fighter, fiery type of guy, but he wasn't. But as a coach, did we see, Casey, a different side of Red Kelly?
Yes, I think so, because as I say, he loved to play, and when he could channel that energy into the play as a coach, I think in some ways it was frustrating that he couldn't get on the ice and make the things happen that he could see needed to happen.
Sure.
And, I think in some ways that was a little bit frustrating to him. It was different to motivate other people to do the things that you knew you could do. And maybe they couldn't necessarily do what he was capable of doing. So I think it was frustrating to him in some ways. And yes, he would get fired up for sure. Okay. And I can remember some very quiet times coming home in the car. He would never express that to us, the anger or the being fired up. We'd see it when we were watching. But when we get in the car to go home, he was quiet. He would be reflecting on what had happened and what needed to happen the next time.
Sure. That's a great point. David, how were when was Red ever away from hockey, even into the years of the book? When was hockey finally over for Red? Was it after coaching, or did he stay around?
After coaching. No, after coaching. He coached for 10 years and he called it a day and got into business. So yeah, he didn't labor into it afterwards. When it was done, it was done.
He didn't stay on as any kind of like ambassador or thing like that. Nothing like that. Yeah. And Casey,
but always a favorite. When you'd see him at Maple Leaf Gardens.
Oh yeah.
He was,
I mean, this is really, we talk about book. This is really storybook because, after the Penguins, he winds up being the coach of the team he loved as a young boy, the Toronto Maple Leafs. What goes through his mind, Casey?
Oh, he was over the moon. I think he was so excited. And I can remember when we were house hunting, he wanted to find a place that he could walk to if necessary, be able to walk to the gardens. And it would be a long walk, but it was possible to do that. He used to ride the subway most of the time
Oh,
to the
wow.
games. And my mom would bring the car down later and park it in the spot that he had, and then we'd all come home together in the car. But I can remember that it was a secret when he first signed with Toronto, and it was interesting because he had to go and see Mr. Ballard, who was incarcerated.
Harold Ballard, yeah.
Yes. So he may be the only coach that negotiated his deal behind bars. But
Yeah.
anyway, it was a secret because the previous coach, I think, was ill, and they wanted to kind of keep it quiet before they announced that there was going to be a change. And I remember that my mom had registered us in the local school under the name Shoemaker because they wanted to keep it a secret. And even when they were house hunting, they used an alias. They didn't use the real name. And I remember the house that we bought, there was an elderly lady living there, Mrs. Thompson. And at the end of the tour of the house, she came out and she said to my dad, "I know who you are." And she winked. And so it was quite funny. And on the first day of school, my mom finally said to them, "I'll say what our real name is. It's Kelly. It's not Shoemaker," because they had just made the announcement that he was going to be coaching. And so I could remember being in the class and the teacher saying, "Is there someone here with the last name Kelly?" And I was sitting in the very front seat because I came in late and everybody else was already seated. And I remember putting my hand up, "It's me." And they didn't even know my first name. Like I had to tell them my first name and everything. So it was fun, but he loved being recognized.
Oh, yeah.
And we could tell we would get a chuckle out of it. He'd be walking somewhere down the street and you'd see people take a second look, and then we'd just kind of smile, and sometimes they would look at us as if to say, is that who we think it is? And we'd say yes.
Wow.
It
But
was
he
fun.
loved that feeling. And what no
He
better
did.
feeling that I feel that is the ultimate compliment when someone recognizes or sees, especially the stature of your father.
And
David,
it happened in other places, not just Toronto. For business, the business he was in was computerized aircraft maintenance for corporate jets.
okay.
And he had to do some traveling with that. And he was in the Paris airport and he was walking down and some man started yelling, "Red, Red Cal."
Wow.
It was a Canadian, but it was in the Paris airport. It was just so funny. It seemed like no matter where he went, people would recognize him. And I think a lot of people were surprised at how tall he was. Even as he got older, he still maintained his
Very
height.
great posture.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, for sure. For sure.
And a good size.
David, of course, you start this in 13 with him and with the family, the book. What does Red Kelly tell you about what he thinks about hockey today?
Um, he, you know what? He was gentleman enough to think that he wasn't going to really say what he thought. I think he probably thought it was a little bit watered down.
Yeah.
But he didn't take away from the greatness of the players he coached, nor the hockey afterwards. Casey might know this more than I, but I never heard him say, "Well, hockey was better in our time." He was always respectful.
Yes.
So
He would say it was different. He would say, it was a different era. It was a different style of hockey. The equipment was different.
Sure.
I mean, I think it disappointed him when he would go to a game in the modern times that there was so much going on that wasn't hockey, with cheerleaders and games and so many stops and play for commercials, and
music.
I think he found that frustrating, and he would have found that frustrating as a player, because you would, in the old days, you'd be so into that game you didn't have time to stop. You just kept going. And how do you keep the players motivated when
Right.
they have all these breaks where they sit and, and then all this other stuff goes on and then they have to get up and play. It has become in a lot of ways more entertainment than sport.
Yes. Yes.
Um,
And I felt in their era, in his dad's era, it was just waiting. Like I can remember going to the Chicago Stadium, and if you were down by a goal, the organist would play a song like, a song like, say, from an Alfred Hitchcock movie, "We're in Trouble,"
Yeah,
or a
yeah,
party song, but no stoppages like Casey's saying and everything else.
yeah.
Before I let you both go, because there's something I want to say here, but this book is fantastic. But there are some pictures in here. Casey, I want to say you were a cute little girl growing up. I saw some pictures.
Thank you.
But there are this picture that David and Mix, I just love this one when he's in the Detroit uniform. That's Red Kelly to me.
His later
But
years,
then
yes.
here is this, seasoned veteran that says, I still got it all going on. And it's this picture in that Toronto. Just, the look of confidence and just, this Renaissance man. And he looked great in both jerseys. So I am so glad you wore both number 4s. We could be here for 2 hours tonight.
We have absolutely.
Just talk. This has been great. And I want to tell our audience, the book by David, of course, had won in 2016 the Speakers Award, as you see there in the background. David, this has been a phenomenal book. And Casey, any closing comments about Dad? Because and one thing I have in common with you about your dad and my dad was born also in 1927, October 12th, and I noticed that Dad was born in 1927. What
Yes.
is your closing comment? And I'll have David make, and then I'll make my own. But what's your closing comment about Dad?
As I said, he was my dad. He was my father, and above all, he had great stories and wonderful memories from hockey. But he was a real family man. That was the most important thing to him, was his family, and that's number one. Yeah, with all his hockey achievements, they were great, but he celebrated with his family. And if he hadn't had the family surrounding him, I don't know if the celebrations would have been as fun and as memorable to him.
Sure.
I miss him. I really do
No,
miss him.
I miss him too.
and David, I have to say, for you to write a book about this legendary man, Red Kelly, this Hall of Famer, one of the greatest hockey players that ever played the game. How was it for you?
It was a huge honor to really get into and tell Red's story, and I was so proud of the fact that we didn't know, but winning that book award for Red, I remember it was handed out at the Ontario Legislature. It was almost like a mini version of the Oscars. Casey was there, and Red was there. We're sitting there, and I remember um, they they announced the winner of the 2016 is the Red Kelly story. And Red looked. I said, Red, we won. We have to go up. What do you mean we won? We have to go get the award. And oh, he was just tickled pink to have won. And talk about competitiveness. He was telling me, he says, I'm at a book signing. Was one time after we're talking, and he said, I was at a book signing last weekend with Eddie Shack. And he said, we're sitting there and no, a card show, but Eddie, people brought their book up for Red to sign. And Eddie says, Red, I have a book too. Red says, yeah, Reddy. But he says, your book didn't win an award. It was an honor to write the book. I was so tickled that we won the book award. And I remember after the ceremony, the judges talking to me, and they said, you were up against 50 books, but it wasn't even close. We all read Red's, and we said, well, the 6 other finalists have to measure up. And they said it was not even close. Red's story was just such a fabulous, down to earth story about a humble man from small town Ontario who would go on to win 8 Stanley Cups and be one of the greatest of all time.
I have to tell you, you talk about the compliment of compliments. That was it to know that. I want to read something that sticks out at me. I mean, I went through the book, getting it a month ago. I'm not done with it, but there's a line back here that, for this young generation or this millennials or whatever we want to use the word nowadays, it's written, and I'll read it to you. There will never be another one quite like him when we talk about Red Kelly. In the heck of an understatement, what a great thing to have his remarkable story told, and told so well. For those who remember, and for a younger generation that will get to know one of the most remarkable figures in Canadian sports history, and we talk about the great Red Kelly. David Dupuis, Casey Kelly, I truly, truly thank you tonight. A childhood hero, and we brought him back for a while. In this book, if anybody can get their hands on it, it's available on Amazon.
Yep.
You can get it. Fantastic. It came out in 2016. And right there, I'm going to leave it like this, Casey. That's the face of a gentleman.
And a champion.
And it is, without a doubt. I want to thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you. And
Thanks,
thank you,
Casey.
David, again, you and Waxy for bringing his story to life in the book.
Awesome. Thank you.
It was a wonderful experience for all of us.
Yeah, and we'll get this out to both of you, this interview in the next couple of days. But Casey, an honor, and of course, always David, an honor.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. I survived. I didn't cough too much.
No, you didn't cough at all. I'm the one with the sore throat now.
I sent it down to Illinois there.
Yeah,
It must be a computer virus.
yeah, please, Casey, let's not go there.
Yes.
All right. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, John.
Good night. Thank you.